If they run separately,
You're not scared of Nasrallah or Poppy.
I'm telling you that they should join together. Please join together so that we can clearly see the anarchy and kumongre.
On Honduran television on Wednesday, administration strongman Mel Zelaya called the Sunday primary elections a done deal. His presidential candidate Rixi Moncada, the current defense minister, has preliminarily received the most votes. Zelaya also took shots at the two likely opposition candidates, Salvador Nasrallah and Tito Asfura, who also goes by Papi. Meanwhile, Honduran electoral institutions are in turmoil over a string of irregularities casting a shadow over the process. I'm Roman Gracier, the editor of El Faro English. It's Friday, March 14th. You're listening to our weekly podcast, Central America in Minutes.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes on El Faro English.
Honduras has spent the week up to its neck in political tensions over irregularities in the Sunday, March 9th primary elections. Voting centers in Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, the two main cities, waited for hours for election materials, including ballots, booths, and biometric machines, despite the fact that the armed forces announced that they had begun to transport election materials 5 days beforehand. In Tegucigalpa, digital outlet Contracorriente reports that the chain of custody of ballots was repeatedly violated. The ballot boxes were supposed to be guarded by the Army in conjunction with the National Electoral Council, or CNE. Since Sunday night, the vote count has crawled along. By Wednesday afternoon, only 33% of acts had been reported online. A day earlier, by Thursday afternoon, the CNE had still only reported 35%. By the current reported figures, presidential candidate and current defense minister Rixi Moncada won the ruling party Libre competition with over 90% of votes. They're the most voted candidate and party, respectively. And in the National Party, former Tegucigalpa mayor and 2021 second-place contender Tito Asfura beat Ana Garcia, the wife of convicted narco president Juan Orlando Hernandez, by more than 50 points. In what was predicted to be the most contested race, Salvador Nasrallah, President Xiomara Castro's former vice president turned opposition leader, beat out former Libre congressman and ruling party defector Jorge Calix by around 30 points to take the Liberal Party ticket. There are hardly any international observers for the primaries in Honduras, whose 2009, 2013, and 2017 electoral processes were each stained by allegations of fraud or constitutional foul play. The OAS sent a 5-member team, while the EU declined to send a mission and will study whether to send one for the general election. The main monitor is from civil society, the Network for the Defense of Democracy, or RDD, which sent more than 1,200 observers to the country's 18 departments. In an election observation report on Thursday afternoon, the RDD found that 90% of polling stations, or JRVs, were correctly closed, but also sharply criticized the procedure and said the general elections must avoid the same mistakes. This is RDD coordinator Juan Carlos Aguilar.
Fortunately, the margin between primary candidates of the three political parties is quite large. Otherwise, we would be talking about a much sharper crisis, a crisis with people in the streets probably. This definitely is a source of great concern for us.
The political mudslinging this week has come fast and hard. The most visible conflict is the relationship between the armed forces and the CNE, which must work together to supervise the process, but have deflected responsibility for the blunders. The army is headed by Defense Minister Moncada, who, again, is also the ruling party presidential candidate, a conflict of interest. If Moncada does not resign from the ministry 6 months before the general election day, she will have plunged the country into a legal crisis. Meanwhile, the rotating presidency of the CNE is led by Cosette Lopez of the opposition National Party. Lopez denounced a, quote, malicious delay by a contractor on Sunday and said she would file a criminal complaint. Councillor Marlon Ochoa from Libre instead called the process, quote, disorganized. The Comptroller's Office, the TSC, said it had opened an automatic investigation. When questioned on the reported breaking of the chain of custody, Chief of the General Staff Roosevelt Hernandez oddly responded that the errors were, quote, part of the experience that is being acquired, an experience of the Army for decades. Moncada put the ball in the CNE's court, saying that the armed forces could not be held responsible because it was the council who was ultimately in charge. Ruling party candidates have also weighed in. Far-off second-place presidential finisher Racel Tomé lambasted the process, focusing on the work of the CNE, as a, quote, historic electoral disaster. And this is San Pedro Sula mayoral candidate Rodolfo Pastor, who from 2022 to 2024 was Secretary of the Presidency and now considered by some to be put out to pasture.
Without a doubt, there is all sorts of manipulation, from the number of votes that were received, the signatures of representatives at the tables, the origin of those representatives. Some of the identities don't even exist.
There's another issue hanging over the election. Honduran writer Oscar Estrada recalled that the electoral process is under a state of exception that suspends the rights to free circulation and gathering. He wrote on his website, quote, the state of exception does not only physically limit citizens' movement, but also installs a sensation of constant surveillance. And when democracy is practiced under the shadow of surveillance, it stops being a free exercise and becomes an act conditioned by fear. Last, we turn to Guatemala. This Monday, March 10th, a judge ordered journalist Jose Rubén Zamora to return to prison after almost 5 months under house arrest. This is Zamora before leaving the courthouse for Mariscal Zavala prison.
In an absolutely arbitrary and illegal way, he decided to return to 2 days before I was released from prison. That is to say, if 2 days before my release I was in prison, I had to go back to prison.
Judge Eric Garcia, who granted Zamora house arrest in October after more than 800 days in jail, complied with an appeals court order and sent him back to prison. But he noted on Monday that his legal opinion has not changed. Zamora's preventive prison is a clear violation of his rights. Judge Garcia also publicly denounced that he received threats and intimidation from unknown individuals. Zamora's courtroom battle has been a mess. What started as internationally denounced money laundering accusations morphed to also include alleged procedural crimes while on trial. He constantly switched defense attorneys under lawfare and threats, but a judge ultimately vacated his money laundering conviction. While awaiting retrial, the Supreme Court ruled that he could remain under house arrest just weeks ago. But an appeals court then annulled months of proceedings, including the house arrest order. That is how he ended up back behind bars this week. In early February, the Foundation Against Terrorism, a plaintiff in his process, filed a new complaint against Zamora for money laundering, alleging that he had received $750,000 not to publish about Juan Carlos Monzon, the secretary of imprisoned former Vice President Roxana Baldetti, in a gossip column called El Peladero. However, Monzon said in a statement that he was not sure that Zamora had received the money. Zamora, whose newspaper El Periódico shed a blistering light for 2.5 decades on criminal structures and corruption in Guatemala, denounced torture and humiliation in prison his first time around. Guatemalan and international monitors, including the UN Special Rapporteur for Judges, condemned the lack of legal guarantees and the ongoing threats against the court. The insistence of Attorney General Consuelo Porras on keeping Zamora behind bars is especially glaring as prosecutors do not oppose house arrest or other benefits for senior military officials or politicians accused of corruption. The Zamora case continues to put the priorities of the Guatemalan justice system on full display. Thank you for streaming Central American Minutes. This episode was written by me, Roman Gressier, and Juliana Ramazzini, with production and original soundtrack by Omnion. If you're enjoying this podcast, you can help us continue translating Central America every week by going to support.elfaro.net and joining our crowdfunding community. Drop us a like or a review. Our mantra is simple: journalism must go on. Hasta pronto.